Too far behind and remained relevant the entire time.
All right, we got to give it up to our MVP of this match. Our official 5G mobile internet hotlink has given it over to Zaim Senpai on his man. I mean, what can I say more about him? He's just an absolute monster here, right?
He's milking the praises, man.
He's milking it, just milking it, right? But at the same time, being a pillar can only go so far. We've seen it last season. There's only so many times you can steal the Lord before your team eventually falls here. And I'd like the point that you brought up, Husky, about the fact that Shizo did play extremely aggressively, extremely selfishly with an entire 5-man roster on Euphoria, but that's supplemented with chemistry. There's a lot of trust going in between the players. Somebody's gonna tank that tower, and somebody might even die tanking that tower. It ain't gonna be Shizo.
Nope, definitely not him. I think in this case, when you look at Zaim Senpai, last season was kind of like the second coming for this man, right? We've seen him in SMG and didn't really get too much play time. Some people might even say that, oh, he's just a bench warmer. This man is washed up at 21. And then during the transfer window, Todak brought him in, and guess what happened? Shot all the way to playoffs and almost made history happen again. But I would say for this year, Zaim Senpai is even also important because we're not only bringing M6 back to Malaysia, the first M series Todak made top 3. Maybe Zaim could be part of that history.
That's
Making
a big
some
call.
big statements here, straight up. But I would be glad to see it. Again, a little bit of bias for Zaim here, but I think this is a player that deserves it overall. Looking at the match statistics for game number 1, it did definitely go a little bit longer than expected with that 18-minute-and-a-half timer. You typically expect that once you reach this stage of the game, Barracuda with the Phobius and the Claude should be able to output more than enough late game damage, but Todak were able to scatter that final fight. And when Barracuda is not able to play their front to back like they want to, it becomes easy pickings for the members of Todak.
Yeah, I don't really have much to highlight in terms of items, but keep in mind here, I think that Barracuda, it's just a lack of experience in this types of push and pull, right? Because atypically, if we are saying Todak is going to play a team fight oriented composition instead of the way that they played it here, which again, it's very much looking to actually dive certain targets and pull out resources from Barracuda before committing to the all-in, while Barracuda is again going to be playing very atypically a team fight composition. Grace did a really good job, but you can notice that certain positions on the map, they're kind of uncomfortable here, especially when it's closer towards their side of the jungle.
And I think there are two very obvious instances. The first one was on the top side of the jungle, right, where they were scattered and they got picked up. Second one was the final Lord fight, where AJ was on one end, trapped, somehow ended up in the middle. I assume he tried to BMI and ult or something and got caught. But at the end of the day, I also want to kind of follow up with your point, Gideon. How can Barracuda recover from this mentally? Because when the game ended, I actually saw it was either AJ or Hesu talking to Grace, and I don't think any of them looked content with the result of that game.
I don't think anybody would be content with it because they had such a good early to mid. It's just closing it out and find that win con. They end up losing the initial Lord. It's like, okay, sure, we'll play for the next one, right? That's atypical. We want to scale anyways, right? We've got a Phobius. We've also got a Claude. Claude's already finished 3 items. Let's give him a Winds of Nature to guarantee to have that insurance policy, and that still wasn't enough.
Yeah, there were definitely some positioning errors during some of these team fights where if Barracuda Esports were able to win out throughout the game a little more cleanly, Todak would probably have had no chance to be able to make that return play even with the opportunity that was granted to them. But either way, I don't think Barracuda Esports should beat themselves up too much about this because their gameplay was still very clean, their execution was great. It was just a few blunders here and there that got taken over by experience from Zaim Senpai's decision making here. So going into game number 2, start with a fresh mindset once again, understand what went wrong here because they had a very genuine chance.
They did.
Yeah, they did. I mean, we're seeing some fragments of maybe Lunatics or Red Esports where back then they would get decent leads and not able to close out the game. And I'm not saying that as a blanket statement to be like, oh, Barracuda is going to have this problem for this entire series. But this first game, the glimpses of it are being shown, right? I mean, don't get me wrong, I think Amao played as good as a Fredin as he possibly could, but that late game management is where it makes or breaks you. That's where when you go up against a team like Todak, if you can't keep it together, Todak will run over you.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like Amal still has this issue from the previous season where he gets a little impatient, especially if he's in an oppressive early to mid game, right? If he starts falling behind early to mid game and then he's like, okay, a little bit annoying. Once you see the mid game, he gets hyper aggressive. He goes too far forward almost and needs to get bailed out by one of the members from the side of Barracuda, right? I think that still persists even here. I just think that as of right now, Barracuda, they need to be able to adapt alongside with their opponents. Because Todak, we saw in the early stages of the game, Grace was doing a phenomenal job pretty much putting Momo out of these fights. Like, Momo was not doing anything from early to mid. Only when we saw that transition from mid to late, we did see the adjustments from the flanking angles of Refelicia and as well as Gary to kind of cause that break in the front to back.
One of the key points that Todak has always been really good at as a team is the ability to adjust on the fly, to be able to figure out what is happening if they're in a losing position and try to change the way they approach the game in order to overcome it. This is a brand new Todak lineup, but it does seem like that same spirit is still being embodied, and if you ask me, it seems even stronger than before now that they have a player like Zion Senpoi calling the shots. The fact that they were able to come up with the idea of, hey, we've already lost this fight, but we're going to re-engage right afterwards when Barracuda has let their guard down is something you would never think of in normal circumstances.
I think it also kind of broadens the win condition for the side of Todak. Back then, everyone talks about Chiku gaming. Even when Zyme is around, Zyme never really got the spotlight unless he has some big moments like ward steals or mountain kills. But right now, you are kind of widening that prospect for Todak. Fly solo as well. He's bringing his experience. I think we're seeing some parts of it in Game 1. Even in this Hall of Fame, every single category is given to members from BRE except for the carry is Dime Senpai again.
Yep, he is just doing a great job. I'm very impressed so far with Grace's performance on this Grok. I would like to see it continue to go through. I think a lot of this game is going to come down to the draft itself, and then we'll see whether or not Barracuda can keep up with Todak on the fly when it comes down to adaptation. Because they come in with solid game plans, a very decent draft. They kind of cover all of their sectors, right? What's the early game going to look like? How do we start scaling for the later stages of the game? And then finally, it comes down to the execution and dealing with the adaptations.
Yep, comparing the two drafts, just like in a vacuum, I would totally prefer Barracuda Esports' lineup overall because, like you mentioned, there's just way more tools and way more consideration being given to every single phase of the game. And again, it was just that one mistake that cost them this victory. Grace really impressed me, and this team as a whole really impressed me because, again, I did predict them at the bottom of the chart. So their performance has already surpassed a lot of my expectations, and I'm just excited to see what they're going to do next.
I think it's a fair assessment, right? Because haven't seen them before, haven't seen this mismatch of players. So it's fine, we can give them some time. I think this goal graph also tells us a very compelling story. Todak slightly in the beginning and then Barracuda suddenly started shooting up. They're winning team fights. Grace, this Grok, his eye for opportunity is unparalleled in this game. And then the Lord fight happened. That's where it all ended.
I think it all comes down to impatience, right? Impatience and also capitalization on certain moments. Because keep in mind, from 3 minutes onwards, we're seeing a good domination from the side of Barracuda when it comes down to team fights, but we're not seeing them actually really extend this gold lead and pushing it in towards the jungle. Like, I'm expecting Gary to never have his purple buff ever again, but it's towards the EXP side of the map.
Yeah.
And that's why it's like, man, if it's a 4v4 and it's like, we got a Fulvius and they've got a Barats. I don't really kind of want to deal with the 20-stack Barats.
That's why around around the second turtle, the gold difference was just like 500-600. You would expect it to be at least 2,000.
Yeah. Basically, I think what happened to Barracuda Esports in this game is what happens to couples who are in relationships too long. They got too comfortable. They got too used to the situation and figured we don't need the pressure too hard. We are winning these fights. We just play like we always do.
I'm telling you, there's actually a dark history behind that analogy. For Red Esports in particular, last season they also were way too comfortable with one another. They were no longer hungry for a win. So every time they lost, it's like, backstage, I guess we lost. You know, let's just do better. And Ama was part of that equation. I'm not saying he's the instigator. I'm just saying that he was in that group as well. So hopefully this new environment is going to bring upon new changes, reignite that hunger within him because clearly Todak is very, very hungry.
Yeah, and I think, Barracuda has a lot to prove. A new fresh organization as well. I mean, getting a win is going to be huge for the organization in terms of just publicity, right?
Yeah.
And I think that when we start looking at these games, you see these really good moments, but you can definitely see the impatience in some of their players. They're more rookie players, in a matter of fact, and even some of their veterans, like Amal, for an example, getting caught here probably wasn't the play, and Grace tried to save and gets punished regardless, right? And even after that, Hesu, he is just going in on these targets. As soon as it procs, he wants to start following up. He wants to get more resources out of Todak when he pops the Demonic Force.
Yeah, and I think Hesu and Grace are just trying to keep Todak back. But of course, some unfortunate areas in terms of positioning in the fight. There was that Lord fight we saw just now. AJ, Gary was trying to one-shot him, but Gary didn't have enough damage. He blew his combo, and AJ just walked into the Lord pit and gave his life up. So that was also a bit of an... I hope it was an unforced error, but this one was kind of the nail in the coffin. Traps getting caught, and at that point, it was all over. AJ got isolated by Shizo, and Shizo completely assassinated him in the back.
Always be wary of the big bad wolf here, and AJ, unfortunately under receiving, remain an absolute terror on the land of Dot. What is it with small heroes that come in big packages? A beautiful score of 4-1 and 11 here, full damage lineup, and basically when you look at Todak, there's no real way for them to be able to catch onto AJ, no real way for them to be able to catch onto Trap as well, because of the way that these teams are positioning around. I really love the way that Barracuda has adjusted here, and AJ able to get the MVP for just dishing out that damage where it's necessary.
Oh yeah, and it also, it's just great the fact that the polymorph just kind of sits there. It doesn't necessarily, it sits there for a while, so it's like, oh no, things are looking bad. The polymorph didn't hit anybody. We pull backwards into the polymorph, and now Todak have to think twice. It's like, oh shucks, this kid is really going to hurt.
And I want to say, because we did talk about how Todak were not in sync at the very end, I think the call for Todak to engage in that 5-on-5 team fight was not a bad call. It's just that Amal's reflexes are insane when you're coupled up with the Hotlink 5G internet speed and the ROG Phone 8. He tapped Daytona's welcome. At the moment he saw the final slash animation, that changed everything.
Yep, because if he got pushed out aside and he has to use this Daytona's welcome so close to the inhibitor turret, well, not even the inhibitor turret, just the barricade of the base, there's nothing much you can really do. You're really out of position at that point.
Barats as a hero is just really good at dealing with these frontline tanky engagers like the Fredrin, which is usually he's picked to counter that, but against the Tigreal as well, he wants to come in with the Implosion. You really gotta be able to flicker Implosion. If you start with the Sacred Hammer, it's so obvious where you're going to come from. Amal really just needs to gobble you up. You're just doing all the delivery for him.
Yeah.
Best part about Barats right now is that he only needs 10 stacks. It's so much easier to stack,
Yeah.
and if you have if you max out your Daytona's welcome, every time you respawn with max stacks. Don't need to go through the effort of getting your passive. It's very straightforward.
Look, he's just a big guy, one big guy. But notice how a lot of these teams, and especially when we're looking at these emblems, most are actually going to receive some extra mana and health whenever they kill a minion this time around, because they're realizing it's not about how fast I rotate out of the lane. The Wilderness Blessing, it sounds like a good idea, but that's only if you want to reach to a target location fast and as quick as possible, point A to point B. But if you are missing out minions, if you're missing out resources in your lane because of that, oh no, I don't have enough mana to actually do anything in these types of lanes.
Yeah, I do like the adjustment of using that basic emblem here, because it basically allows you to increase the frequency of your ganks while also clearing waves a bit more effectively. In that sense, you can see how the game is really accelerating, and why mid laners, junglers, roamers are starting to take emblems like that to make sure that they can stay on the map longer rather than having to recall and heal up.
Yeah. It's a big adjustment, right? It just shows the meta of the mid lane as of right now. Everybody can clear the wave quick, like decently quick. The question is, how much health are you walking out of that lane? How much mana, more importantly, are you walking out of that lane with?
Even more important for heroes that don't really want to buy the talisman, right? You want to straight go into a lightning trunk to just on raw damage. I believe it's called Life Dream Emblem.
Yes.
Yeah, Life Dream Emblem just makes it so much more convenient for you. Though I would say I do not think that Arlott has won any games.
No.
Nope.
It has not gone well for Arlen this time around.
In both roles.
In both roles. It just seems to not have... I think it's not that it's not effective. It's more so teams are very familiar with dealing with it.
There are a lot more conditions to make an Arlott Arlott work. It's not like, oh, flicker ultimate, right? Implosion, you know, if you this one is, okay, final slash, that's great, but if I start it off, which means I'm committing, and you guys are committing. If I don't start it off, someone has to do it. In this case, Rafflesia and Gary has to be kind of the catalyst to route Barracuda up, but as the game went late, Momo felt like he needed to do something, and Rafflesia became the one that follows up with Momo, and even that wasn't really done well.
I disagree with that. I think it's more so the miscommunication with Shizo, because at the end of the day, who has the reliable damage to make it happen? It's definitely Shizo. Because Zyme Senpai, it's like, yes, you can put him in a position where you can land the Star Shatter at max range, but that doesn't necessarily guarantee a kill. Someone could potentially block it, right? You want Shizo, who's able to auto-attack the right targets and more so hit multiple targets at once.
I think when you're talking about reliable damage, though, therein comes a really big problem with Todak's lineup, in that Shizo is basically the only reliable damage they have. Zyme Senpoi's damage is very burst-based and very conditional, and while Arla can do some DPS here and there, Momo's real job is to set things up, especially since Rafflesia couldn't really do it this game. In comparison, Trap can do damage, AJ can do damage, Amal and Hesu both can do a good amount of damage themselves while staying strong in the fight. Once you got to that late game phase where normally Claude should take over the game, he can't do it because he's the only one that can on the side of Todak.
I think this is also a good time to bring up an item that AJ actually bought, and it's an item that we don't see as often, the Genius Wand. I believe that was the first core item he bought on this Nana. And it's deceptively powerful. As if you are on Todak's, if you are Todak, you don't really realize the effects of it until it was too late. Your front lines are essentially melting before you realize that, oh goodness, he actually has a Genius Wand, and by that point, you've already died once, suddenly BRD snowballs the lead, and there's nothing you can do about it. Your item timings are delayed.
And it's great because it synergizes really, really well with Nana specifically, because a lot of her abilities have multiple hit effects. The Boomerang guarantees 2 hits, the Polymorph is another one, so that's 3 already stacked if you just go for first and second ability. Let's not even forget, you can just ult out of nowhere and still get multiple stacks going on for you.
Absolutely. There were just so many tools from Barracuda this game, so I really love how they drafted. It's very smart. It's not just the fact that they have a lot of crowd control, it's the fact that their damage comes from multiple sources and in multiple different forms, making it difficult for Todak to itemize, especially when they're behind, right? Their tanks want to be roaming around supporting the game, which means that they're not going to be getting a lot of money, and all that time you have to build anti-heal for Amal, Hesu, and Grace, you have to build a Tina shield for AJ, you have to build some anti-cuirass for Trap. It's really effective.
Let's look at our Hall of Famous Horse Trap. Our rich guy Zyme Senpoi, the one that does the most damage. As always, Amal with as the sandbag and AJ as the best wingman. And now this reminds me of something. I wonder if we would get to see the Zyme Senpoi special, the Farsa.
Ooh, the Farsa.
Ooh, that's been a while.
I don't think so.
It has been a while.
I don't think so, because if he does, Momo is like, hey, boyo, it's time to play Dive Heroes, the Lapu, the Yutong. I mean, bring out the Forme special as well. Throw in a Benedetta into the mix these days.
I personally want to see Lapu. I'm surprised we have not seen a single Lapu even being considered.
I think teams are really not giving these dive EXP laners a lot of opportunity to shine nowadays, even though we have a big team fight meta where like having a dive composition would be really handy. We've already seen the effects of it when I believe Selangor Red Giants drafted the Yuzong along with their front to back. Why don't we see more of that?
Well, I think a lot of these laners need especially specifically in this game, both these EXP laners don't mind leaving pressure, giving pressure away, right? I mean, we can see it in the match highlights itself. It's okay. Oh, sure, Arla gets shoved in. That's not a big deal. At the end of it, what is his purpose? His purpose is to look for a big set. He's not looking to dominate here. Unlike Hesu, who is playing the Thamos and is like, I need to dominate. If not, I'm going to scale off and not have relevance.
Then he's like an attack dog. He's like, wow, 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 go, 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 go. And then he was also the reason I think Barracuda secured 2 lords in a row.
Yes.
Because he's just looking for Gary. The moment he's Gary, he's like, ah, boy, come, taste my ultimate. And Gary can't do anything about it.
He just gets melted down slowly, right? And Gary can, yes, he does have like somewhat of a way to kind of deal with the Thamos, and it's not like Thamos is going to put him down to 10% HP, but considering how long these Lord fights actually go, it starts to build up.
Yeah, it is pretty funny as well, because Gary on the Fredrin, his job is to taunt enemies to attack him, but Hesu basically is self-taunting himself the whole time. It's like, fight me, bro, fight me.
Fredrin is like, all of you, but not you.
Not you.
Stay away.
Anyone but you.
Yes, anybody else. But overall, that's what we're seeing in this game, right? I think Barracuda are in a more comfortable position in these types of fights where there are simple protocols to follow and nothing too flashy coming out or to expect from Todak's side. And plus, Todak has a very honest composition, not looking to go for these ultra big flanks, and especially with the way the early game actually went, playing towards the EXP side of the map.
A stellar beginning to Saru Saturdays here as Todak secures a well-fought victory, with Zion Senpai securing MVP of the match, and honestly, it could go to no one else.
Man has only went down like what? 3 times in total across 3 games, right? And I'm including the Novaria game in this. If he keeps doing this, man, I have nothing else that can top the good things I've said about him.
I mean, I feel like he hasn't changed much.
No.
This time on SMG, pretty much the same thing.
Still the same Zion.
Still the same Zion that we all know and love.
I still remember the times when he was playing as a roamer as well and making plays even like with flicker wild charges, doing things that other players would only dream of being able to do. So it's clear that the game sense on this man is on a different level altogether. And I'm very happy to see that he is with a lineup and a coach with so much potential and their eyes set for the skies.
Yeah, I think Gary, said it quite well during that interview. The fact that this team is great at adapting, right? They're great at consistently learning on the fly, and I think that's one of the biggest strengths that Todak have so far. We don't see that blind aggression anymore, but we do see at least somewhat a controlled tempo.
As perhaps this series, the results could put some of the doubts to rest as well, because a lot of people, you look at the scrim results of Todak and you know how netizens go. They have no faith in Todak. They're like, wow, you're spending on imports. What are you going to do with it? I think this is a good omen for Todak. At least when you look at the series as a whole, taking on Barracuda was not an easy feat.
Absolutely not. And I think a lot of that is props given to Barracuda as well. I think this is a team that came into the season with not a lot of expectations compared to all the other incredible lineups we've seen, but they really gave Todak a run for their money today. And even until the end of that game, anything could have happened. So we really got to keep our eyes open for both these teams as we proceed with the regular season. But for now, let's look at the match.
Yep, I mean, based off the items so far, we can see that everybody was looking to somewhat have some kind of defensive utility against their opponents. They didn't want to afford to get caught here. Even Emal himself is like, you know what? I'm taking a Winter Truncheon just so that I can dodge one more extra ability if necessary.
And I think at the end of the day, it really came down to just who makes the first mistake or who takes the first initiative, right? I think Barracuda and Todak, they both have their fair share of errors, but it was Todak's willingness to look for opportunities that really garnered them that lead that broke open the entire game. And when you look at Barracuda roster as a whole, they're not the most hype roster coming into this season. They're definitely the more low-key one, aside from their very colorful thematic on their social media. But aside from that, I think expectations aren't really set for this team. They themselves have set it high.
Yeah, I would agree with that statement as well. I think that, especially in a match like this, right? Yes, they are actively trying to look for these types of pickoffs here, but I think a lot of the onus, I would say, is due to the experience from Todak. The fact that when they are looking for picks, the timings of when the waves are about to crash and when they are about to spawn are very, very precise, in a matter of fact. They know that a rotation is expected to be made, and that's why they're looking for those picks in the first place. Unlike Barracuda, we don't see that exact type of precision.
Yeah, I think experience speaks volumes when it comes down to macro decision making like this. It just takes a lot more time on the stage to be able to understand timings based on minion waves, based on the flow of the game. And I think Barracuda Esports did do a good job overall. I think a lot of their decisions, a lot of the team fights that they did take were made on the fly, but they were still able to take control of most of this game until Todak decided it's time to slow things down, wait for Shizo to get full build, and then just run over the game with it.
I think a stalemate is actually the scariest state of the game, right? Because that really comes down to how much control do you have over the state of the game? How do you start manipulating the micros, like your lane equilibrium, your map control? I think that's what Todak has been doing very well. They are fine playing a slow and quiet game, but Barracuda, you can feel the nerves settling in. They're like, oh well, we don't see anything. We gotta get something done. And that's where Todak is good at responding with their own pounce.
Yep, the impatience that started to build up here. And I feel after 2 really decent games coming in from Grace, Game 3 is where he actually played by far the worst on this Arlet, where it's so all in. These final slashes were not making the impact we were hoping to see.
The impatience, right? It's like you are jittering a little bit, you are making the calls, and he's still actively trying to find an opportunity, but he's starting to miss the beat a little bit.
Yes. It's unfortunate to say the least. I would say that consistently, Amal, whether, yes, game number 1, the most impatient I've ever seen him. Game 2 and 3 is when he starts calming down. They kind of all need to kind of heat up, warm up together.
Yeah, you gotta have that synergy between the team here, but a lot of potential is there. It's just quite unfortunate that Arlet's 0% win rate still persists here until day 2. Someone's gotta break it eventually.
Eventually. I don't know. I gotta double check the stats to see how good it's going amongst public ranks before we start comparing it to the competitive scene globally as
I
well.
want to look at the other regions, man. I know public ranked, it might be skewed a little bit because they build full damage Arlets.
At least it gives us a baseline at the very least
That
of what
is
it
true.
should be leaning more towards.
Maybe that's what the players should start building, right? Just full Hunter Strike, I don't know, Thunder Belt.
That is what people are building on Arlet in the EXP lane, though. Being able to just one-shot people is very effective when you have like the Vengeance combo with the Final Slash.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good time. And then Mincetar shows up and he's just like, I will build full damage as well.
Yeah.
But can you believe it? Mincetar got won a game before Arlet did.
Oh man,
so true.
You are correct. Now that you frame it like that, it's even sadder.
All right, let's have a look at the Hall of Famers here. From Rich Guy B, from the Rich Guy to the carry, from the sandbag to the best wingman, we're seeing Zyme Senpai. We're seeing Zyme Senpai consistently on the carry every single game.
Yeah, Zionist must be happy they don't have to change the portrait for the camera.
They don't have to change his picture.
It's just Zyme Senpai all the way.
Our designer is just holding his fist together. It's like, yes, a big fan of Zyme Senpai. Saves me a little bit of work.
Now he just needs to be able to secure his spot on the other roles as well. Like one of these days, all 4 is just gonna be Zyme
It's
Senpai.
gonna be a
I'm
sad.
gonna have a problem if he is the sandbag, unless he plays like Terizla mid, but that is highly unlikely.
Hey, who knows, man? Todak, with Todak, you know, never
Todak is
ever
one-
know.
You could see like the Phobius mid. You can see if you still want the old meta, you got the Grok mid. You know.
Zyme is his own person. He's not gonna be influenced by all these shenanigans, you know. That's why he's the pillar of the team.
Let's have a look at specifically the gold graph here, because I think this tells quite an interesting story here, because it's, I wouldn't even say it's a back and forth. It really is, when do people start hitting their power spikes and when do you see the adaptation begin for a team? For Todak, it starts at the 10-minute mark. Prior to that, Barracuda, again, we are seeing them go in, but this time with a very good reason of why they can actually capitalize and multiply that goal by 2x or even a 5x this time round to break it into at least a 5,000. They hardly even broke 3,000.
I think it's very smart what Todak did do here, because now that they're under the tutelage of Coach Fly Solo, it does seem that they're a much more controlled team, right? We're not really seeing the same Langar style, where we've seen this gold graph earlier in the series as well, and it never really leaned too far in either direction. Todak seems to be very good at maintaining the net worth at a manageable level. They still really like going for that late game, but they adjust their draft and their gameplay to make sure they never fall too behind until that power spike comes.
Yeah, when you look at the first 2 lords, despite Barracuda getting the lord, Todak is the one that has the goal advantage, right? It's not a big goal advantage, as not after the first one, but the second one is where they started getting all the kills onto Barracuda. They took care of the lord, and that is also, I think, a big factor of why Barracuda's goal lead never really got increased, because Todak was just stopping them, was just throwing a wrench in their plans, even though the plan sort of worked out.
Yeah, I mean, you can see even in the highlights, right? The general idea is to play around these neutral objectives and get these either a pick or a really, really big fight. And that's the biggest problem, because there's so many ults that disrupt the entire composition from the side of Barracuda, especially that King's Call. And it's obnoxious to deal with. And if not, you still have to worry about the Mystic Gush at the very end as a big nuclear option.
This one was kind of what really started the comeback for Todak, at least keeping them in the game, right? Barracuda got the dive and just ended up in a what do you call it, a kill box.
And Todak never fully invests either in these team fights, right? You can see that they're not really going for these team fights with the purpose of taking the objective. They're going in with the purpose of picking off members of Barracuda who go too far, because they know with Shizo around and Zyme Senpai, Lord defense is not going to be much of an issue for them.
I mean, it's tough. It's tough